work that I do. I'm also really excited to be here. I begged Miss Wendy to allow me to come. I met her about 2 weeks ago at the Makers Conference, and just hearing from people who have been doing the things that were so emergent, diversity and inclusion, equity, these things that often become a matter of survival. We see overwhelmingly when it comes to Gen Z and millennial groups, we don't learn how to fill out checkbooks or how to balance a checkbook in school. And then yet when we're 18 years old, we're expected to take out the equivalent of a mortgage in order to finance the rest of our lives. And if we don't do those things, and Lord knows most parents are not as prepared as you were, Mr. Tubbs, so it's about getting those things together and making these things very equitable and accessible. And so the reason why I'm focused on this idea here of accessible education is because it's been my whole life. I was the only black girl in my school in San Marino, California, and I was told every single day that if my hair wasn't done, we were just going to be late for school because I was the only black kid that anybody was going to see that year. And I had to be the representative of black folks. Now, that's a lot of pressure to put on a kid, but I was in pageant, so I was ready for it. I was like, oh, okay, all right, stage, let's go. And it taught me how to develop a voice, how to challenge authority. My parents made the mistake of, arguably, it was a good idea, but they told me that if a teacher ever says anything to you that's wrong, let them know. So I was like, well, this is incorrect. I didn't know that they meant something that makes you uncomfortable. I just thought anything that was wrong, and they always had my back. I also have a younger sister named Chelsea, and she is autistic and bipolar. And when we were little, it was the early 2000s when we started, getting into elementary school. I was born in 93. I'm 29 as of recently. And it was one of those things where every time I'm going to stay at the podium so that you don't have to move the camera, sorry. Every time we would go into a classroom, at one point, she was enrolled in 2 schools because my mother knew that she was going to get kicked out of one, 2 different private schools, which is a lot of tuition to be paying. She was a behavioral problem. She was a personality problem. But she wasn't a problem. What was the problem was the way that we were doing these things, the way we were organizing these different systems. And what we needed was accessible education. And I saw the way that Chelsea went from having sensory issues of not even being able to hold a pencil to now doing needlepoint professionally. She runs her own Discord server. She manages everything. It's really about what we look like when we invest in people, not just in terms of education, but in terms of economics and in terms of having those different resources. I forgot all of that by the time I finished at college. I went to Louisiana State University, SEC. I have tutored a lot of our favorite athletes. And when I was at LSU, I got into this place, as we see a lot of folks right after they get out of college, feeling really high and mighty with my $10 words. I knew everything. At 22, had all the life experience I thought I was ever going to need. And thank goodness that I ended up having a capstone class with Miss Sadie Roberts-Joseph. I was talking last night about how my mentor was the late Congressman John Lewis. And he's actually the reason why I converted to Islam. He was not a Muslim man, but he told me that I really needed to find some type of God because I was so exhausted from all the organizing I was doing as a student. And he introduced me to Miss Sadie Roberts-Joseph. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about LSU. So, first of all, football school. Why did I go there? Because I said, oh, yeah, go Tigers! Oh, amazing. And so when I went there, I had seen my older brothers and sisters having gone to Wellesley and Howard and Claremont McKenna College and cry every single time they came home about how hard it was and how they didn't want to go to school there. And you know what I said? Nah, I want to go to a school that's going to be fun, that has a great network, because that's how I know that I thrive. I'm excellent at networking, I'm excellent at working with people, and then an amazing history program. But I was often in Dr. Stater's office at the history program. He looked just like Bill Murray, so just picture Bill Murray. And every time I walked into that classroom, or into his office, he was like, okay, what's the problem now, Blair? This is something that my parents told me to do. If there's an issue, you need to get a solution. And I said, Dr. Stater, I have to do an unpaid internship to graduate. He's like, yes, Blair, I know, but that's just how the school is. We can figure a work-study program if it's really a financial burden for you. And I was like, I don't have a problem with that. He was like, oh, okay, because he was right. I have no problem with where we're doing these internships. Blair, you're doing this American history, reconstruction to the 70s. You have to do it at a museum. Okay. Dr. Stater, all the museums in Baton Rouge are plantations. I don't really feel comfortable doing an unpaid internship at a plantation. And he was like, fair enough. And so we got real creative with it. I ended up interning at the Oda S. Williams, now and then African American Museum. And thank God that I did, because the amount of hubris I had for having a taste of education, of going to a place of higher learning, it was toxic. And thank goodness I didn't post about that too much, because Lord knows I post about everything else. And what Miss Sadie Roberts Joseph told me, one day when we had a group of 8-year-olds coming to learn about chattel slavery and sharecropping, I was like, Miss Sadie, they're not going to understand this. And she dragged me, within an inch of my life, metaphorically, and said, Blair, if they don't understand, it is not on their ability to comprehend, it is on the teacher's ability to teach. And that completely shifted the way that I started to do education. It was a AllySHiFT, if you will, and realizing that those of us who are in the know, whether it's around economics, whether it's around the history of the United States, we have a duty to be allies to those who are uninformed. Not to be frustrated with them that they don't know, or that they don't have time, or that they didn't go to college like we did, but to have empathy for the fact that there is that missing piece. There is that gap. Next slide, please. So in 2020, I had the distinct honor of going viral for talking about race, and it's so hard when people are like, so how did you get started in your career? Running my mouth on Twitter. And no, but honestly, I studied at Louisiana State University. I got a degree in history. I wrote 2 different history books on women's history and on the history of the Great Migration. And I started to use social media as an avenue to communicate more about these different aspects. What I focused on in my undergraduate degree, as well as in my second book, was about the role of the GI Bill and how there's so much housing disparities, just the amount of redlining. You mentioned the 2% figure for the amount that was allotted for the George Floyd commitments. That 2% figure shows up again when we see who is getting investment in terms of venture capitalist dollars. The thing is that the average person who needs to know this stuff does not have time to sit through or look through that 150-page case study about what is happening, to come to conferences like this even. And for those of us who can, it is our duty to be allies to those who are not in this room, to break it so that it's not just the folks who are here, but all the people that we know in our whole sphere of influence. But how do I do that in a way that's going to be catchy? How can I talk about things like how, basically, how do we get out of this siloed conversation where we have, confrontation becoming a blood sport online, as you said, I wrote that down, I love that line, to a place of building and harmony and accessibility so that way people can get that education and they don't even know that they're being challenged in their mindset. So I have 2 lessons that I'm going to show you. The first one, we'll do the next slide in a second. I want to show you the ones I have on screen. These are the middle one was the most fiery one. Annoyed a lot of folks. Yoga and cultural appropriation. I worked with a woman who grew up in India. She's Hindu, talking about how exhausting it is for people to do goat yoga or to say things like, why don't you namaste in your lane? But then also bring it back to the roots about, actual yoga, talking about cancel culture and how we talk about cancel culture, but who's really being canceled? It's all the people who are incarcerated in prisons in the United States. They had one, misdemeanor or the 3 strikes rule in California, and they're canceled in a way that isn't at all equivalent to what happens when a billionaire gets told that he, is short or something, whatever Elon Musk is banning people on Twitter now for. But, and then being able to build with people and community. And so the next one I'm going to show you in just a second is all about how do we get folks who have a struggle with hearing people criticize the American dream. People who, my grandparents, they got the GI Bill, they got housing. Why are all these other people deciding to live in poverty? And we talked about this yesterday, as if poverty is some suburb that exists. Oh, like poverty, Texas? No, we're not living in poverty, we are impoverished. But how can we shift that understanding to really have more compassionate literacy of these issues, and then move forward in a way where we can also be, we can communicate those to those people who are uninformed and do so in a way that makes them laugh at the same time.
I think this is what the Founding Fathers would have wanted. I don't think the Founding Fathers would have wanted us to be free from slavery. Happy 4th of July. You ruined everything. On July 4th, 1776, the country that would become known as the United States of America was primarily in the business of enslaving Africans as chattel, displacing and attempting genocide upon indigenous people, and heralding itself as the land of the free at the same time. Today, the United States has the highest rate of incarceration over any other country, and slavery is still constitutional as a punishment for crime. Land treaties with indigenous communities continue to be disregarded. The right to decide when or if to give birth has been struck down by the Supreme Court, and the lives of any and everyone who does not share all of their identities with the Founding Fathers continue to be debated and policed. Wait, if you're going to keep criticizing America, why don't you just lead? Well, Founding Father Thomas Jefferson said, when injustice becomes law, resistance becomes duty. Really? Yeah. Thomas Jefferson also said that all men are created equal, while enslaving over 600 human beings over the course of his lifetime. America is a land of contradiction. Ignoring the ways that America falls short isn't going to make life in the United States better for anybody. If we truly want to be the land of liberty and justice for all, there's a lot of work to do. But ignoring these problems is no way to get toward a solution.
Thank you. One thing that's really interesting with this is that I have, additional readings lists. If you want to dive into that conversation around discrimination in terms of housing, there's an excellent documentary called Pruitt-Igoe that talks about the housing discrimination. It's really necessary for everybody to watch, especially if you're in any type of urban planning or design. If you want to know more about the prison issue, watching 13th, there's so many different ways to take that further, but a lot of people, we are underpaid, we are overworked, and a lot of us don't want to do more work when we get off of work. And for a lot of people, even though these issues are so pressing, it's like, how do we fix it? How do we do more? And so that was kind of a broader view of how I do this education work. But let's get into how I talk about financial education and the importance of labor unions. So I posted this one recently.
How was the wedding?
It was such a beautiful union.
Union? Why are you two talking at work? Because we're not robots, and socializing is important. Did you just say socialism?
She said socializing.
Oh, well, you two better not be unionizing. Unions are groups created by workers for workers. Workers have shared interests like making a living wage, having safe working conditions, and protections from corporate backlash. Through unions, workers can advocate for themselves as individuals and each other as a group. Unions are evil. That's propaganda. Unions are the reason we have weekends.
Well, I do like my Saturdays.
Unions are also responsible for the end of child labor, the 40-hour work week, overtime pay, minimum wage, and the 8-hour workday. Unions threaten capitalist greed by putting power back into the hands of the worker. Because of this, unions have been villainized. Union busting, or anti-union organizing on the behalf of corporations, can be as subtle as preventing workers from talking to each other in the workplace, and as overt as anti-union campaigns. That's real. In the United States, you have the right to form, join, or assist a union. Before unionizing, make sure to research the law and the specific policies associated with your employer. And remember, Smarter in Seconds is an educational series and does not constitute legal advice.
Smarter in Seconds. That's my jingle. I had to make sure I didn't get sued by anybody. People come for these funny sketches, but then they can stay for financial literacy. And the problem is that we have so many different institutions that have these massive gaps in financial literacy. Workers need to know that it is in their best interest 9 times out of 10 for them to unionize, for them to organize. And it's really important for consumers to understand so that when we have organizations like we were talking about earlier, Procter & Gamble, having these behind-the-scenes corporate social responsibility schemes that are so important and so powerful, those being communicated to these Gen Z consumers and investors. They're becoming investors now, they're growing up so fast, because they want to know what is the supply chain, they want to know what are the worker ethics, and they want to know how to make themselves financially literate. So I'm doing a lot of these different series, and I was talking to Wendy before about how this is kind of bridging the economics and the education space, but really to drive it home, something that I'm working on right now in the vein of accessible education is a series that I'm working on with Holler, which is owned by Group Black. I can't say the name of the series, we're under a lot of NDAs, but it basically teaches young Black and brown children how to understand economics, how to do things like if you have a business, you have to fundraise as a preschooler needing to learn this information. If you have a business, you need to advertise. If you have something you need to raise money for, you have to fundraise. You have to get people who are invested. You have to get customers and consumers. You have to have suppliers. And having community solutions to community problems. And the story arc of the show, which I think I'm allowed to say, is, I'm like trying to visually remember, is saving a community space from it being turned into a parking lot. And these are issues that are really being applied to people today. And so it's looking at all these different economic issues and not waiting for us to be saved by those folks who were trying to pull black into the black community, but getting, having a multi-pronged approach. So it's not just at the top level, it's at the grassroots level, and we're reaching everybody through these different mechanisms. So that's my Starter in Seconds, that's my approach to accessible education, and how it can be applied to better the economic power of the Black community in a way that people don't have to do those extracurricular activities in order to get in touch with and engage with. Thank you.